as a citizen of the United States, you have civil rights, which you can exercise at any point in a police encounter, including a DUI arrest. One common question I get is about Miranda rights, and that's because typically Idaho police officers aren't giving proper Miranda rights to drivers in DUI cases. The real question becomes what happens if they don't Mirandize me? And so if you'll kind of follow me through here, when somebody makes a statement against their interests and that was subject to Miranda, it can be excluded from evidence, but only the statement itself can be excluded. Okay? So let's take a typical DUI stop. The officer observes some driving pattern which he thinks violates the law and he pulls you over. He says he smells alcohol, and so then he asks you out of the vehicle. He has you perform the field sobriety test, and then you undertake some type of breath test or blood test. Any statements you made, like, yes, I'm drunk, take me in, if they were subject to Miranda protections, can be excluded. But what can't be excluded under Miranda is the breath test results, the officer's observations about, your intoxication level, your watery eyes, whether you smelled like alcohol. So all this other evidence has no import or doesn't matter to your Miranda rights. It's just your statements. So you can kind of see that for the most part, a DUI arrest in case doesn't rest upon your statements. This isn't a classic case where you confess to murder and there's no body and the only thing they have to get you on is your statements. A DUI arrest typically doesn't rest on your statements alone. What that means is the officers are supposed to Mirandize you. If they don't, we can suppress your statements. But in all honesty, it's likely not going to be enough to win the case in and of itself. The standardized field sobriety tests are a series of 3 tests that you're given on the side of the road, and they're the eye test, there's a walk and turn test, and there's a one-leg stand test. You have the right to refuse those tests. The officer won't tell you you have the right. He'll just say, hey, we're going to do field sobriety tests and kind of get you doing them before you realize that. Now, admittedly, this video might come to you a little too late, but you should be aware that the field sobriety tests are not required, and you can refuse to take those. So, and oftentimes you'll have such health problems, your knee or your back will be out and you won't be able to take them anyway. But with respect to field sobriety tests, every driver in the state of Idaho has the ability to refuse those tests. And here's the benefit. If they can't use their observations gained in the field sobriety tests against you, it handcuffs them or makes it more difficult for them to establish the legal basis to arrest you and get you down to the station to take the breath test. So in some cases, it can really help. You have rights related to your breath test. You have, in Idaho, the ability to refuse the test. Now, there are consequences that come with that. But you do still, in Idaho, maintain that right, subject to, in some areas of the state, a forced blood draw. So it doesn't feel like you have much of a right because they punish you for exercising it, and they frankly ignore it when you exercise it and take your blood anyway. But you still have that right to refuse. The other right that's really important is you have the right to submit to kind of like a secondary test. But you have to request that. So what I mean by a secondary test is after you've done the breath test and the officer says, hey, you blew a 0.10 and that's over the legal limit. You, and now it's at your own expense, can say, I want to have a second test done at, like, let's say the hospital. You want it to have a blood draw, or you want to go to a local breath testing agency, and those are located throughout the valley. You have a legal right to that, but you have to request it. So after the breath test, it's important for you to tell the officer, hey, I want to have my breath tested somewhere else or my blood tested somewhere else. And that will, you have a legal right and you should be permitted to do that. If the officer takes forever to book you, let's say he's like, okay, we'll let you test, but we're just going to take our good sweet time. So 4 hours later, by the time you get a test, then there's an argument that it really doesn't matter. 4 hours later, it doesn't matter if you're under the legal limit. We tested you at the time and you were over. They're not allowed to do that. So once you request a secondary breath test, you need to let them know that you want that as soon as possible, that they should get immediately in the process of booking you and allowing you to leave so that you can go get that test. So finally, it comes down, this last section of the video will be about, your response to the officer. and how your cooperation, how far it will go to help you in a DUI case. Typically, I tell my clients, if the officer asks you how much have you had to drink, you're being investigated for a DUI. And you need to be aware of that in as far as whether you're going to answer that question, you have the right to remain silent, but also to know that that's not a typical question that happens when you get pulled over for just having a tail light out. So that should be a signal to you that this is no longer just going to end up in a traffic ticket and me driving home. The minute he starts asking you about your alcohol use, you are entering a more serious type of a police investigation. Now, you still maintain all your rights. You can refuse to answer that question. You can request an attorney. You can refuse those field sobriety tests. The real point I want to impress upon my clients, and I guess to anyone watching this video, is you need to be aware that all of a sudden the cop has now shifted gears and you're being investigated for a DUI. So if you take the attitude of, hey, this is not that serious, and if I just, answer a few questions, the officer's going to let me go, I think that's a misguided hope at that point. You need to be aware of those rights. The minute he starts asking a question about alcohol use, you need to really seriously think about whether you're going to answer that question or whether you're going to exercise your rights and stand silent.